Catholic pilgrims, as we learn from one of Spain's most revered saints, Saint Teresa of Avila, a spirited doctor of the Church. Join me, Amy Thomas, once a week as we read from Saint Teresa's book, The Interior Castle. Hello and welcome back. It's that time, Catholic pilgrims, to hear from our beloved Saint Teresa of Avila. So we are learning from Saint Teresa about some of the trials a soul may face in the sixth mansion. Last time we heard about one of the lesser trials, and that is having friends and family, maybe even strangers, think that your increase in piety is all a show, and they accuse you of trying to score favor with people. Today we are going to learn about some more trials. Again, I think it's good that we are hearing these things because we need to know that suffering and trials are a part of the Christian life. In fact, suffering and trials are a part of every life. It's just that Christianity gives meaning and purpose to suffering and trials because Jesus suffered and died for our redemption. I think it scares us greatly to fully realize and accept that Christianity will not save us from suffering and trials. And we ask ourselves in the depths of our souls, what will my suffering be? And maybe you've already gone through some very tough stuff. Maybe you've been hit with a severe sickness or the loss of a loved one too soon. Maybe you went through war. I saw both my grandfathers suffer from what they had witnessed in World War II. Maybe your spouse has left you, or maybe you feel lonely and are struggling to find a spouse. Maybe you are struggling with infertility. And once we've been through some form of suffering, we hope and pray that that is it. God allowed the trial, may there please be no more. But then we think, but what if there is more? What will it be, and can I survive it? Like I said, suffering scares us, and we'll discuss more on the other side of our readings. So our readings today will be from the Sixth Mansion, chapter 1, numbers 14 through 18. We'll jump right in, so grab your book, and let's begin. Now to speak of other trials and illnesses of many kinds which generally occur to people in this state. I knew someone who, from the time when, 40 years ago, our Lord began to bestow on her the favor described, could not affirm with any truth that she had been a single day without pain and other kinds of suffering. I am speaking of physical infirmities, besides heavy crosses sent her. True, she had led a wicked life, and therefore held these troubles very light in comparison with the hell she had deserved. Our Lord leads those who have offended him less by some other way, but I should always choose the way of suffering, if only for the sake of imitating our Lord Jesus Christ, though in fact it profits us in many other manners. Yet, the rest would seem trifling in comparison could I relate the interior torments met with here, but they are impossible to describe. Let us first speak of the trial of meeting with so timorous and inexperienced a confessor that nothing seems safe to him. He dreads and suspects everything but the commonplace, especially in a soul in which he detects any imperfection, for he thinks people on whom God bestows such favors must be angels, which is impossible while we live in our bodies. He at once ascribes everything to the devil or melancholy. As to the latter, I am not surprised. There is so much of it in the world, and the evil one works such harm in this way that confessors have the strongest reasons for anxiety and watchfulness about it. The poor soul, beset by the same fears, seeks its confessor as judge, and feels a torture and dismay at his condemnation that can only be realized by those who have experienced it themselves. For one of the severe trials of these souls, especially if they have lived wicked lives, is their belief that God permits them to be deceived in punishment for their sins. While actually receiving these graces, they feel secure and cannot but suppose that these favors proceed from the Spirit of God. But this state lasts a very short time, while the remembrance of their misdeeds is ever before them, so that when, as is sure to happen, they discover any faults in themselves, these torturing thoughts return. The soul is quieted for a time when the confessor reassures it, although it returns later on to its former apprehensions. But when he augments its fears, they become almost unbearable. Especially is this the case when such spiritual dryness ensues that the mind feels as if it never had thought of God, nor ever will be able to do so. When men speak of him, they seem to be talking of some person heard of long ago. All this is nothing without the further pain of thinking we cannot make our confessors understand the case and are deceiving them. Although such a person may examine her conscience with the greatest care and may know that she reveals even the first movement of her mind to her director, it does not help her. Her understanding being too obscure to discern the truth, she believes all that the imagination, which now has the upper hand, puts before her mind, besides crediting the falsehood suggested to her by the devil, whom doubtless our Lord gives leave to tempt her. The evil spirit even tries to make her think God has rejected her. Many are the trials which assault this soul, causing an internal anguish so painful and so intolerable that I can compare it to nothing save that suffered by the lost in hell, for no comfort can be found in this tempest of trouble. My maternal grandfather was probably the toughest man I've ever known. One of 10 kids, he was raised out in western Kansas during the Depression. And he would often talk about how there was very little to eat. They ate a lot of biscuits. And sometimes they would have to eat roosters, which he said were nasty. And he would tell me and my cousins about how his dad would work so hard to provide that sometimes when he came home at night after work, he would fall asleep over his plate of food. My grandfather helped shear sheep to support the family, and he got paid a nickel a sheep, and he always said it was very hard work. He served in World War II under Patton and helped to liberate one of the concentration camps. When he would tell the stories of entering the camps and seeing the prisoners, he would always get choked up and say through tears, "You just can't believe how horribly some people will treat others." He started his own construction business when he got back from the war and worked hard all the way into his late 80s. He had suffered in his life, yet he never used his sufferings as an excuse. He just accepted that life has suffering in it and you can either wallow in it or press on. And he didn't let it steal his joy either. He loved to tell jokes at the dinner table. I mean, he would get so tickled by his own jokes. He loved gardening. He loved his family. And no matter how hard of a day he worked, he was always willing to do something with his grandkids when he got home. In our day and age, many of us live in relative comfort and wealth as compared to the majority of people throughout time. Most of us have never had to go through seriously hard times like my grandfather with the Depression and a major world war. And I'm speaking mostly here of first world countries. Think about it. We have air conditioning and central heat, refrigerators, stocked grocery stores, sweets and gas stations, phones that can give us all the world's information, and cars and planes that can drive or fly us anywhere we want to go. And we have entertainment at our immediate disposal 24/7. We aren't shearing sheep to survive or eating roosters or shooting squirrels to put food on the table. Because we live in such relative ease and comfort, we have come to expect a certain level of satiation and pleasure. We don't want to do without for 1 second. We are an instant gratification culture. And because suffering isn't forced upon us the way it used to be for most of the human population through poverty, famines, war, and hard physical labor, we take a lot of things for granted. I mean, my grandfather worked so hard outside doing hard physical labor all the way into his 80s. And now we have people demanding to work from the comfort of their own homes through telework because they just don't want to go into work. We avoid suffering at all costs. And I'm not saying that we should go out and seek suffering and trials on purpose. But most people completely and utterly fall apart if any suffering comes their way. In fact, many people view a life of suffering as not a life worth living at all. We have forgotten that suffering is a part of the human experience. St. Teresa talks a lot in our readings today about suffering. And there are two key things I think we need to take away from what we read today. Number one, suffering allows us to imitate Christ. St. Teresa says, quote, "I knew someone who from the time when 40 years ago our Lord began to bestow on her the favor described, could not affirm with any truth that she had been a single day without pain and other kinds of suffering. I am speaking of physical infirmities, besides heavy crosses sent her. True, she had led a wicked life, and therefore held these troubles very light in comparison with the hell she had deserved. Our Lord leads those who have offended him less by some other way. But I should always choose the way of suffering, if only for the sake of imitating our Lord Jesus Christ, though in fact it profits us in many other manners." Unquote. Christ suffered for our redemption. We can unite our suffering that we experience to his, and instantly it has a redemptive quality about it. And this is extremely important. Any suffering we experience here on earth is light in comparison to the pains of hell that we deserve. To turn your back on God because you feel he is mean for allowing us to suffer will quite possibly only land you in a place of eternal suffering. And you will not have alleviated the suffering you are going through now. Number two, the devil will always try to get you to suffer through remembering the sins of your past. St. Teresa says, quote, "For one of the severe trials of these souls, especially if they have lived wicked lives, is their belief that God permits them to be deceived in punishment for their sins." Unquote. Continuing on, she says, quote, "The remembrance of their misdeeds is ever before them, so that when, as is sure to happen, they discover any faults in themselves, these torturing thoughts return." Unquote. This is one of the ways the devil causes me to suffer. He pretty consistently tries to get me to think about the horrible sins of my past. And they torture my thoughts and sometimes really dishearten me. Like St. Teresa says, it has caused me to, quote, "think God has rejected me," unquote. This used to really drag me down into a spiral of bad thoughts about myself and doubting that God really did forgive these sins I'd asked forgiveness for. Now, though, because I know this is a tactic of the devil, thanks to our wonderful saints who warn us, I am better equipped to fight against this. I know it will pass, and I just choose to occupy my mind with something else and not give the devil space in my head. But we do need to be aware of this, though, and realize that it can cause suffering. Suffering isn't fun, and we all know this. And suffering will come in this earthly life, whether you believe in God or not. Suffering without God is just dumb suffering and will cause despair. Suffering united to Christ's suffering, even when God feels absent, is the best way to imitate our Lord. And it is the best way to burn off the weakest parts of us. And it allows God to transform us in ways that we cannot possibly imagine. My grandfather was a great man, not because he suffered, but because he pressed through his suffering and allowed it to strengthen him. And also, it made him grateful for the many blessings in his life. So that is all for today, Catholic pilgrims. If you are going through some suffering right now, I pray that God grants you many graces to bear it well. It won't be long until we are back here soon, and until then, live the faith boldly and travel well.